What's up, my lords and ladies? Welcome back to my fourth video in my chapter review for A Song of Ice and Fire. Today we are going to be reading Daenerys 1, which is, in my opinion, one of the saddest chapters in the book so far, and probably in the entire book, if not the entire series. The first thing I would like to mention is that there is going to be a trigger warning for mentions of rape, sexual violence, domestic violence, and abuse. If you are sensitive to any of those topics, this is probably not the video for you. We're going to be covering some heavy topics in here, and I want you to be fully prepared and fully open to watching the video. Now, the first thing I want to mention is how Illyrio is obviously trying to gain something from his relationship with Daenerys and Viserys. He is described as a man who would sell out his closest companions if it would serve his own self-interest. Yet he does not give the Targaryens over to Robert Baratheon, even though it would probably give him immense wealth and power. Think about it. If he gave the men that Robert hates over to him, he would get so much money. He might even get lordship in Westeros, which would be a lot. He would have power over the only unified continent in the world. And Daenerys even mentions in the books that gifts such as food and housing seldom come without a price in the free city of Pentos. If Illyrio wants something, he wants it, and I wonder what it is. What is he trying to get from Viserys and Daenerys? I mean, obviously, it is like what Viserys said, that if he does come to power on the throne, Illyrio essentially becomes the most prominent figure in Westerosi history. But Illyria has to realize how far of a plan that is. I mean, they are two powerless children. Not children, I think Viserys is like in his 20s or something. But he has no power. He can't do anything. The only reason why Daenerys had any power is because she had 3 dragons. Viserys had none of that. So, he's playing a game, he's scheming, and we learn more about those schemes later on in the books. But right now, we are just left with an impression on the cheesemonger, the spice trader, or whatever his job is. He's scheming. And the next thing I would like to mention is Viserys, his physical appearance. He's described as gaunt with a feverish look and nervous hands. Now, this is probably because he spent 15 years running away from invisible cutthroats and assassins. I feel like he definitely it took a mental toll on him. He did not come out of this process. He did not come out of this process a clean man. He definitely has some trauma in there that needs to be unpacked, and he definitely takes out that trauma on Daenerys. We fully see in this chapter that Viserys is a horrible brother and honestly a horrible person. The mental stress put on him by Robert is definitely something that cannot be put down or not powered down. That cannot be. Sorry, I'm struggling to try and find the right words. There's a word in my brain that I just know would suit this well, but I can't get to it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't find the word. I've been thinking about it for a while. You guys are you know what I'm trying to say. So let's move on to the next point, which is that it's also mentioned that Viserys has anger problems. He uses the term waking the dragon a lot. Daenerys says that Viserys gets angry and sometimes he will hit her, which the term waking the dragon is funny to me because Viserys is probably the furthest thing from a dragon. This weak, skinny man who has no power over anyone or anything, and he's cruel to a 13-year-old sister in the worst ways possible. I mean, it's probably because he grew up alone. And I'm going to say this, I made a video about this previously on TikTok, but I firmly believe that George wrote Viserys as this cruel and evil to show that Daenerys is someone who is good and kind despite her upbringing, which goes to show that she's different than the average lord or lady because of the trauma that she experienced in her childhood. And speaking of Viserys, I would like you guys to read this text highlighted in yellow. Now, if you still have any love for the man, I think it ends there because this guy does horrible stuff in this chapter that we will talk about. He is a terrible, terrible, terrible man, and I tried to sympathize with him. I tried to understand where he's coming from, but I just hate him. And moving on to something besides Viserys just being a bad person, I'd like to talk about Daenerys' soliloquy-esque monologue in her head. I think it's George kind of reaching out the page to scream at the reader. This person is a child. Her story is of sadness and suffering, and she suffers. It is a great passage as we see that Daenerys just wants to be a kid. She wants to frolic in the fields with other children. She doesn't want the weight of the world on her shoulders. She doesn't want to be a political pawn, but she is forced to by her brother, and she has to grow up quicker than she should have had to had life have been a little bit better to her. Now, the next thing I would like to talk about is a slight exposition dump where we learn more about Rhaegar and the Robert's Rebellion. George has mentioned the Targaryens at least once a chapter for the entire book up to this point. And I get why he does it. He wants us to learn more about the background and why characters do things. But I do feel like it gets a little excessive. But I don't mind. George has a way of writing exposition where you don't even realize that he has spent pages talking about past events that no one has been present for. I mean, Catelyn talked about the Robert's Rebellion. Daenerys has talked about Robert's Rebellion, and each time I'm like, wow, this is so beautiful. Like Catelyn mentioned, 16 years ago, Robert and Ned met the usurper at the Battle of Ruby's Ford. Not the Battle of the Trident, it was at Ruby's Ford, and Ned wasn't there. But they talk about it on and on. Ned talks about it. Everyone talks about it every single time, and it's very enjoyable. He does it very well. And speaking of exposition, I'm just going to show you guys 4 of these highlights. I'm not going to talk about them because they're really nothing of importance. I would just like to show more exposition that George R.R. Martin does right. Considering that this is the first 5 chapters of his first book in the series, it's going to be exposition heavy. You just have to expect that, but I think it's quite easy to read considering how enjoyable it is. Now, the next thing I would like to mention is that Daenerys says that in the alleys and the wine sinks of Pentos, they call her brother the Beggar King. And my first thought was, how in the world does she know this? She's 13. What kind of bars is she visiting? And what does she do there? I mean, I shudder to think about what she would be doing there. At best, she's begging. At best, maybe she has a part-time job serving alcohol to drunk guys. But very worst, I don't even want to talk about it. But the alleys make more sense. She's a small kid. She probably wanders the streets, but maybe, who knows, maybe being a child going to a bar in the medieval time isn't something strange, but where I live, it is strange, and I am quite fearful. And I do think the Beggar King is a good fitting title for Viserys. He begs quite a lot, makes sense when you have no money. I do feel like he should have been a little smarter. He had his mother's crown, which probably could have gone for quite a lot of money. So if I was him, I would have either taken that money and maybe hired a sword trainer, gotten a little bit of experience, then gone off and fought with the free companies. If not, I would buy some property. I don't know. The crown would probably get him a good amount of money. It's the crown of a Targaryen. He could maybe get a small plot of land, start up a small farm, or he could buy a house in the city and make a bar or something. Just try and get some passive income, my dude, instead of going from house to house saying, I'm a king, I'm the Targaryen king. Like, you need some money, dude, and for money you need to build up an empire. You should be playing business empire instead of begging at the magistrators. If I was you, you would be the owner of 13 bars, and you would be the wealthiest man in Pentos. Instead, you're the poorest person in the entire world. I mean, you're not the poorest, you sell like stuff, but anyways. The next highlight I'm going to show is that garage doors opening, I live in a house, is that Daenerys never wanted to be queen. While Viserys is talking about how he is going to reclaim his lost kingdom and riches, all Daenerys is thinking about is, I want to go back to the house with a red door, where I was happy and I was relatively safe, where I had a childhood. She wants a childhood. She wants to be safe. She doesn't want riches and gold and glory and King's Landing and the throne like Viserys. Viserys, they are opposites. Viserys doesn't care about the small things. He wants what was his. He dreams of being king, probably. And I feel like George is trying to make us empathize with her. And as we learn more about her dreams of comfort and safety, and he definitely juxtaposes her and her brother's dreams, where he dreams of conquest and kingship, and she dreams of safety and comfort. Um, and the reason why is probably because Viserys was old enough to know what it was like to live a life of wealth, while Daenerys has only ever known begging and poverty. And now I just want to say, and I'm gonna say this quietly because I don't want my parents to get mad at me, but fuck you, Illyrio, you slave owning piece of shit. You have slaves, which is one, really freaking bad. I don't like you for that. And two, you and Viserys treat Daenerys like chattel. You are both losers, and I hate you. Viserys sells his own sister for the promise of an army. Who does that? Why? Come on, man. That's your sister. And why to a Dothraki? Couldn't you couldn't you at least marry her to someone of like important political renown, like the free lord of some country, not country, of some kingdom? Uh, I feel like you could maybe you could find someone, like you find the lord of the Golden Company and marry her and marry him and then take over all the other sellsword companies and then go sell to Westeros. Um, but Viserys says something that made my blood boil, and I'm not gonna tell you guys right now, because that happens later on. But just know he's a loser. Let's move on to Daenerys getting dressed as she is preparing to meet Khal Drogo. But she's dressed in these fine silks and this luxury dress, and she wears a collar of gold etched with Valyrian runes. And while this might seem like a massive luxury, it's fine metals and decorative ornaments, and it's expensive, but she remembers something that one of the servants said. Khal Drogo is so rich that even his slaves wear collars of gold. This has to be the most obvious in your face statement of all time. If anyone denies it and says, "Oh, they were husband and wife, and Khal Drogo loved her," Daenerys is not Khal Drogo's bride. She is a glorified slave with the sole purpose of giving him an heir. They inspected her like a piece of meat, commenting on her weight and appearance. Viserys even asks if Drogo likes women this young, implying that even he knows that what he is doing is wrong. That even he knows Daenerys is far too young to be getting married to a 30-year-old warlord. Sorry, I had to take a small break. I'm getting quite mad. Come on, George. Why couldn't you have written a different story altogether where Daenerys is happy and ends up married with someone that she loves and then dies at the age of 80? I just feel like that would have been better. Now, let's move on. After this, Viserys discusses how he might win the realm. He says all he needs is 10,000 Dothraki to invade, and after that, loyal men would join him. And this might seem like a good plan, because there were Targaryen loyalists in the battle. That you had most of the Reach. Dorne probably would join him because of Elia Martell, and he believes that the small folk would rise up for him. But it is naive at best, relying on the premise that there are people who would risk everything to fight for a man that they never knew, or at most, they knew a child of a man, because he was 8 when he left King's Landing, don't forget that. In fact, we see right after this just how speculative it is. He anxiously asks Illyrio if the people truly do love him, in which Illyrio replies, "That is what I've been told." To me, Viserys seems like a man playing at war. He has no idea what it means to take a country, a kingdom, and win over the people. And he seems like he's foolish enough to listen to the lies of a man that he shouldn't trust. And now after this, the group moves in and switches scenes to the party where they are eventually going to meet Khal Drogo. But before they can get into the actual party area, an unsullied warrior slave blocks their way, and we see just what Viserys is made out of, which seems to me to be like cheese, because he clenches his borrowed sword tightly, looking terrified. He doesn't draw his sword, he doesn't say anything. Only after the encounter does he say something where he calls the slave like something derogatory. And listen, I'm not saying that he should have cut the guy's head off and that violence is always the answer, but if you're going to clench your sword, draw it. It's like what Shank says, a gun is not a toy. It's a declaration of war. I don't know. That was like 20 years ago.
I'm saying that guns aren't for threats, they're for actions.
But it just shows how inexperienced he is at what he claims is his birthright. Sorry, my dogs are quite loud. I will not edit that part out. But during the party, we get a description of all the types of people in attendance, and I really enjoyed this segment of it because George seems to have a world that he cares deeply about, and it makes it so much more alive that everyone is different than just some copy and paste European feudal lord. We see there are men from the port of Ib, Bravosi, we have Dothraki, Pentosi, Listman. We have one dude from Westeros, which I'll get to. But the scariest part of the event is when Daenerys realizes she is the only woman in attendance. And all the women watching this know that, holy cow, this is terrifying. She is in some medieval-esque party where she is the only woman and she's going to get sold off as I think we can piece that together, but I would be terrified for my life, and Daenerys has every right to be terrified for her life. She's trapped in a room with dozens of men that she does not know, and it gets even worse when she takes one look at Khal Drogo, and she is terrified, and she starts to beg to Viserys. She says, "Please, Viserys, I don't want to be his king. I want to go home." What does Viserys do? Does he say, "Oh, it will be okay, it's fine"? No, he says the worst thing in the entire world. Viserys says, "Home? Trust me, we will go home. We will return to King's Landing with an army." And even if that requires Khal Drogo's entire army raping his sister to secure his army, he is willing to let atrocities befall his own sister. And it's not even the fact that it's his sister, it's the fact that he's willing to do this to another human being that screams out to me, this guy is insane. And he is insane. Oh my goodness, someone please kill this man. The chapter ends with and then the chapter ends with Daenerys just listening to Viserys. Viserys says, stand tall, sister, and show off the parts that you've just been given, like the lady parts. I'm sorry, guys. I'm trying to keep this somewhat family friendly. I have hopes of getting monetized, so I don't want my channel to get deleted, so maybe I'll put the text up on screen, but just go and read the chapter for yourself if you want to listen to George describe all this in detail. But Daenerys stands up tall, which not a good thing in this moment. Every other time someone says they stand tall, good thing. This time, I wish that she slapped Viserys on the face and ran away. But that's where it ends. That's where it ends. It ends with Daenerys preparing to get married to a hebephile, with a loser. It ends with her listening to her pathetic excuse of a brother. It ends in sadness and misery and pain. And this might be the most brutal chapter I have read and reviewed so far. It had me at tears in some parts. You can hear it in my voice. I am disgusted and angry at the same time. But my general thoughts is that George uses this to give us some more background information on Robert's Rebellion, the Targaryens, and Daenerys' family, Rhaegar, which I loved that part. That part was good. It was great. Um, he also used this to set up Daenerys' personality and story arc, which I hated that part. And I feel like people could make some good arguments that is does George brutalize women too much at points? Does he use sexual violence to essentially make them more, I don't know, set up their hero's journey more? Probably. Is this a bad thing? Most likely. I'm not going to get into it that heavy because that's not the primary focus of my review to talk about modern feminism and how it relates to A Song of Ice and Fire. If you guys want me to talk about that, I'm not going to. I would just link you to a video that does it 1,000 times better because this might be insane, but I'm not the end all be all when it comes to this book. Um, but I liked this chapter. I think the first half was great, and the second half was just sad, just really sad. But that's gonna end this video, probably the longest one I've done so far. Uh, Goodbye, guys. Try not to cry. Hug your sisters. Have a good day.